They're fresh off their first 10-win season since 2001. But can Syracuse replicate that success in 2019? Find out here on the Gridiron Expert.
Yeah.
After going 4-8 in his first two seasons with the Orange, Dino Babers shocked the nation by leading Syracuse to a 10-win season in 2018. Now the question is, can Syracuse do it again? Especially without the all-time leading passer in Eric Dungey, who will now hand over the reins to sophomore quarterback Tommy Devito, who had plenty of playing experience last year when Eric Dungey was out with an injury. And the beauty of this is that Syracuse not only gets a solid quarterback in Tommy Devito, but also returns their leading rusher last year in Mo Neal, who rushed for over 800 yards, and some of their top wide receivers back in Sean Riley, Taj Harris, and Nakeem Johnson. DeVito takes over this offense with plenty of playmakers returning, an offense that had 40.2 points per game last season. So this offense, even though they lose their all-time leading passer in school history, should not see a decline in production on that side of the ball. Syracuse is once again going to be a major threat, and what would you expect from a Dino Babers-led team? Defensively, they're going to be even better. They returned 7 starters on that side of the ball, including Alton Robinson and Kendall Coleman along that defensive line, each of which had 10 sacks last season. They also have 3 seniors in the secondary, and Evan Foster in that secondary was 3rd in tackles last year. So this Syracuse defense, I think, is going to be even better than they were last year. And this Syracuse team is going to be very complete and very well could contend in the ACC Atlantic, especially when they host Clemson in Week 3. But first, they have to get past 2 very tricky tests and very sneaky teams in Liberty and Maryland, both of which are on the road and both of which have brand new head coaches going into 2019. We'll start with Liberty, and most times people would write that off as an automatic win. This year, that's simply not the case. Liberty going to be led by former Ole Miss head coach Hugh Freeze, and it's kind of an odd place to be. And I think I've told many people that I think this is going to be a very short stop for Hugh Freeze. But last year, their first year in the FBS, Liberty went 6-6, and they returned 15 starters from that team, including their quarterback, Stephen Calvert, who is now 3rd all-time in Liberty passing yards. So he's a very dangerous quarterback. Remember, he was the quarterback. This was the Liberty team that 2 years ago upset Baylor in that season opener. So this is not going to be an easy game and a cakewalk for a Syracuse team that went 10-3 last year. But even though it is on the road, I think the Orange get the job done. They simply have too much talent there. And even if Liberty's offense puts up some big numbers, much like Western Michigan did against Syracuse last year, I think the Syracuse offense is going to be able to take care of this Liberty defense. They start off the year 1-0. Their first loss, though, unfortunately, comes in Week 2, very early on, against a dangerous Maryland team. And when I say dangerous, I mean because we don't know a whole lot about them. Mike Locksley comes in as a brand new head coach for the Terrapins. They bring in a transfer quarterback in Josh Jackson from Virginia Tech, and that right there gives Maryland a huge boost. With a brand new head coach and not just a new quarterback, but an experienced quarterback, that makes them a threat in the Big Ten and maybe pull off a handful of upsets there. They're also going to have Anthony McFarland at running back, and if you remember that name, that's because he had an absolute field day in their devastating loss against Ohio State last year towards the end of the season. But I think Syracuse goes on the road and loses this game, due in part because of that dynamic offense that Maryland's going to have. And this is what Maryland and Locksley need, that signature win early on in the season to kind of get the fans and get that team in support and buying into what Locksley is selling. If they can get this win over what should be a top 15 or at least a top 25 Syracuse team, things will be trending in the right direction for the Terrapins. And I unfortunately think Syracuse loses that game. Now the big one. Week 3. And another reason why Syracuse could potentially lose this Maryland game is not only could they be outplayed, but because they're looking ahead to this Clemson game. It's a very dangerous 2 weeks there. And this Clemson game is the homecoming game for the Orange. Homecoming in Week 3. Couldn't think of any way to do it better. Last time here at the Carrier Dome, Syracuse pulled off the upset over the Tigers. Yes, Kelly Bryant did get injured in that game, but Syracuse was playing well even with him in that game. Last year in Death Valley at Clemson, Syracuse should have won. And can you imagine if they had? They blew a 10-point lead, allowed Chase Bryce to come in there and Travis Etienne to run all over them towards the end, and ended up losing by just 4 points, 27-23. So you know Syracuse has revenge on their mind. You know this crowd at the Carrier Dome is going to be packed and loud and hoping for a major upset that could send Syracuse into first place of the ACC Atlantic Division. but it's unfortunately not going to be enough. They will fall to the Clemson Tigers in the Carrier Dome. I just don't see anybody in the regular season beating Clemson. They have Trevor Lawrence, the best quarterback in all of college football. They have Travis Etienne, who had a field day, over 200 yards against Syracuse last year, and arguably the best wide receiver core in the entire nation. And while they did lose so much talent on the defensive side of the ball, Dabo Swinney knows how to replace the defense and knows how to coach one up. Unfortunately, Syracuse starts off the season 1-2, and people will begin to panic. People will begin to say that what happened last year to Syracuse was a fluke, that 10-win season should never have happened. But that's just simply not the case. That first part of the schedule, those first 3 games, are not easy by any means. They get back-to-back wins here against Western Michigan and Holy Cross, and I write off Western Michigan fairly quickly, even though the Broncos put up 621 yards of offense and 42 points on Syracuse in last year's season opener. This year it's in the Carrier Dome. This year it's 4 weeks into the season. I think Syracuse gets a win over Western Michigan and Holy Cross there. They are now 3-2 after a much-needed bye week, going on the road to North Carolina State. And last year they took care of the Wolfpack, winning 51-41. Here's the problem, though. This game, to me, feels like a major trap game. They are both coming off a bye week. Syracuse and North Carolina State both. It is on a Thursday night. It is on the road. And while North Carolina State does lose their star quarterback in Ryan Finley, and maybe the offense will have some struggles which will benefit the Syracuse defense, this North Carolina State defense, especially led by a very, very strong secondary, will be able to get the job done against this Syracuse offense and a brand new quarterback. And I think Tommy DeVito has big things planned and will do great things for Syracuse. He's only a sophomore. They can get 3 more years out of this guy. But right now, I think they fall on the road to the Wolfpack. And unfortunately, once again, they're starting 3-3. Everybody begins to freak out. Everybody begins to say what happened last year was a fluke. But just wait until the second half of the season. They go back home to face off against a Pittsburgh team that they should take fairly easy care of. Last year, they lost on the road to Pittsburgh by 7 points in overtime. That was right after that Clemson loss. That was a game Syracuse should have won. They were simply the better team, no doubt in my mind. But after losing in such devastating fashion to one of the top teams in the nation, they fell in overtime, and I can totally understand why. They do lose, however, Pittsburgh does, Quadre Olison and Darren Hall, both of their top 2 rushers from last season. This game is going to benefit Syracuse majorly, and I think they take care of Pittsburgh in a dominant fashion. I think they blow them out of the water in the Carrier Dome to show that they are still legit. They are still contenders. Syracuse gets a win here to get back into the win column and back up to above 500. And then their signature win of the season, in my opinion, over Florida State on the road. And before people start to criticize me for this, you have to hear me out. Last year, Syracuse in the Carrier Dome defeated Florida State 30-7. 2 years ago at Florida State in Tallahassee, they lost 27-24. They are due a win in Tallahassee, and I think it comes right here. Florida State does have a lot of returning starters, 16 as a matter of fact. Yes, they should have a better quarterback in James Blackman. At least the situation, period, should be better. Yes, they have Cam Akers. Yes, they have some solid wide receivers. And yes, the defense should be much better than they were last year. It was absolutely atrocious. The Florida State last year, period, was atrocious. But I think Syracuse is going to be high after winning against Pittsburgh. They're going to, once again, this is a talented Syracuse team. This first half of the schedule is just pretty brutal for them. And I think they go on the road, catch a Florida State team that might be looking ahead a little bit to their next weekend's date against Miami, and the Orange get a huge win against the Seminoles in Tallahassee. They come back home once again to face off against a Boston College team that will own a very solid offense, which is actually ironic considering they are usually known for their defense. They have Anthony Brown and they have A.J. Dillon, but Alton Robinson and this defensive line for Syracuse should be able to bottle up this A.J. Dillon-led offense squad, Eagles squad, and I think they get a win over the Eagles. So now you're looking at 3 straight wins for Syracuse, and they are now bowl eligible, sitting at 6-3. They get a much-needed bye week going into a game on the road against Duke. And these last 3 games are extremely favorable for Syracuse. That's why I mentioned look at the first half of the schedule, where you have 2 dangerous road games and a game against the defending national champions, versus this second half of the schedule. After a bye week, they go on the road to face Duke, a team that loses their star quarterback in Daniel Jones and will now have to be led by Quentin Harris, who had plenty of playing experience, kind of like Tommy DeVito when Daniel Jones was out with an injury last year. But Syracuse is 0-6 on the road versus coastal opponents. I think that changes right here. I think Syracuse goes on the road, gets a win against the Blue Devils David Cutcliffe usually overachieves, and I think this late in the season, their offense, everything should be clicking. They'll be borderline bowl eligibility here, but Syracuse gets a win over the Blue Devils, especially coming off a week of rest. No doubt in my mind they get a win on the road against Louisville, who will be having a brand new head coach as well. Let me make that a little more clear here. Who will have a brand new head coach in Scott Satterfield from Appalachian State. They returned 10 starters on the defensive side of the ball, so it might be a bit of a test for this Syracuse offense, but I think the defense has a field day against the Cardinals, who are going to struggle offensively, much like they did last year, led by Juwan Pass, who had just 8 touchdowns compared to 12 interceptions. Even though it's on the road, even though there's going to be a new era for the Cardinals, they take easy care of them, and they close out the year with a win over Wake Forest, back at home in the Carrier Dome. They have Jamie Newman returning at quarterback for Wake Forest, who kind of rushed onto the scene. Wake Forest had one of the weirdest quarterback situations in the country last year with the amount of people they had to play. Jamie Newman is finally their guy, but they lose their star wide receiver in Greg Dortch. They only have 5 returning starters on the defensive side of the ball. Syracuse, on senior night, will be able to get a huge win over the Demon Deacons, and after a 3-3 start, they finish the season 9-3. And some people may look at that and think that's preposterous. They might think that's ridiculous. I'm here to tell you that it's not as crazy as it seems. I broke it down for you how crazy and how difficult that first part of the schedule is, especially those first 3 games. Maybe you disagree with the loss against North Carolina State. Maybe you switch those and give them a loss to Florida State and give them a win over the Wolfpack. Regardless, I still think this Syracuse squad finishes 9-3. And while everybody else is going to sit there and criticize the Orange for their struggles early on, I'm going to sit here and tell you not to worry, Orange fans. They will be back. They will clinch a 9-3 season and could very well get another 10-win season if they can win in their bowl game. Dino Babers is building something with the Orange, and he's going to have another major successful year in 2019. So, guys, as always, thank you for watching. Please continue to like, comment, and subscribe, and we will see you next time here on The Gridiron Expert.